All right, so we'll call to order the February 12th meeting of the Town Council Study Committee. As Vice Chair will be chairing today since Joe is remote. So we'll just take a quick roll for those that are here on the committee. Rachel Mandel.
Here.
Jill Veith.
Here.
Curtis Barnes. Here. Joe Grouse.
Here.
Kelly Steffen.
Here.
Donna Martino.
Here.
And I think that's all of the committee members since Jill is here. For Joe, oh, here comes Nancy. So before we do a motion to accept the agenda, we've had one request. I think some people walked in late on this. Nancy Holmes, the town clerk, item number 8 has asked to been moved up.
Her name just came up.
Yep, she's asked to be moved up the agenda. She's got to go do some marrying at 4 o'clock. I told her that was probably okay. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to accept the agenda as
So moved.
amended. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jill, all right,
Aye.
all right. So, Joe, you sent the email out on this. Do you want to set Nancy up a little bit?
Well, Nancy, we sent you, we sent you the, I think the draft charter that had some election administration issues, and the committee was a little concerned that, not knowing how this actually is done day to day. We thought it'd be worthwhile to have your input on some of those, again, possible ways that the election could be held. And I know you sent us back some information. I did distribute it to everybody, but probably would be easy if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us your impressions and maybe taking some questions.
Sure. No, not at all. Can everybody hear me okay?
You're great.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, because I can hear you, but my sound is a little bit muted on my computer for some reason, but sorry about that. So Joe sent me the section on elections from the Collins Center. And I really just had a couple of comments. The first, mainly on the first section, which was when town elections will be held. And what the notes say here and what Joe had sent me is the committee had considered having April, but there was concern about electing new councilors prior to the adoption of a budget. So what the recommendation was here under 7-1 was the second Tuesday of June in each year. And what I had told Joe in my email to him that I'm happy to share with you is just that the state is strongly considering moving the state primary to mid-June of each state election year, which is even years, biannual even years. And so that would be problematic for us to run 2 elections, particularly if one of them was a primary the same day or even a week apart. That would be a bit of an issue, and that's my concern. That has not been voted yet, but there's a lot of pressure from the state town clerks to accept a June date because they're scrambling to get the ballots printed for the November state elections. So I was just at a conference and I got the impression that it's a very plausible option that the state will do that. So what I had said to Joe is what would be better for us is kind of around the time we do it now, which is late May. And the budget is also already set then. I spoke to Brian Turbot and the budget is set then as well. So that would be preferable to us. That was my comment there. And then ballot position, that all sounds fine to me about the drawing by lot. Nonpartisan elections, that's state law, that's no problem. The signature requirements, that was my really my only other comment. All of this was regarding the signature requirements. I think the time frame is a little tight, and I think we need a little bit more time there for papers to be available because the cutoff to withdraw is 33 days by the state statute prior to an election. So I detailed that in my email. It's not very profound, but it's maybe a little too complicated for me to go into too much detail here, other than to say we currently give candidates for a town election about 5 to 6 weeks to have their papers, to get their signatures. Then they return them for certification, and then there's usually about a month's time until that state mandated withdrawal date. So I think we just need a little more time there in the signature requirement section, in my opinion.
Nancy, that sounds like about is it about 2.5 to 3 months between
Yeah,
first being
it's
able to pull
about,
papers and the end of May, the 3rd week or the 4th week of May for actually holding the election? Is that what you're
yeah,
suggesting?
about 2.5 months. Yeah, because the deadline to withdraw by the state rule is 33 days prior to the election date. So say the election date was May 20th, like this year, the election's May 20th, and our deadline to withdraw is April 17th. So what I typically do is I have a proof of the ballot all typed up. And after April 17th has passed, in the next 1 to 2 days, I order the ballots so that I can get, the vote by mail ballots out or the absentee ballots out and have them ready to go. So I think we just need a little bit more time in that timeline, in my opinion. And then
Hold
for the
on, if you could just Mel or Anthony, any of the Collins Center folks, do you have any reaction or comments, or does this sort of make sense to you?
If I may, I have a couple of comments on the election date, not necessarily the signatures. That can certainly be moved. I know that in the past, June primaries were considered, and many of those bills sunsetted in the legislature at the end of December. There's a new session. The 2 session bills I found this session, discuss either the 2nd week in May or the 3rd week in May, I believe. Let me see. Yes, I'm sorry. The 3rd Tuesday in May or the 2nd Tuesday in May are the ones that are before the state legislature right now. I really don't think we can know what dates they're going to pick if they choose to move it. There have been bills for the past several years to move it to the spring, and none of them have passed yet. This may be the year that it happens, but I'm not sure. So I think the best we can do is, and in that case, if we chose May, it would be right. If they chose May and we chose May, it would be at the same time. I think most council managers who have spring elections have them in April or June. And if we stick with those slots, it seems to be that we would be in good company. Either everyone would have to move or not. But I just don't think we can know what the date will wind up being if they change the primaries.
Joe, the other thing I would add is that the Nantucket budget process may conclude in by late May. In the current process, typically, and in the proposed charter, we've drafted the budget process a little later, and it typically is for council forms of government.
Okay.
Okay, so you're saying that the budget may not be set until June or the end of May?
I believe we have a deadline of June 15th.
Again, but that's
Thought it was June
that's
1st.
assuming we're
June
going through the
1st.
conversion to a town council, right? I mean, that,
We should clarify that. It may be June 1st. Let me just confirm.
Curtis had a
Yeah,
question.
I'm just comfortable with Nancy's recommendation for May. I think those dates make good sense to me.
Jill?
Yeah, I am too. I think to keep things more similar to what we have, but if moving things up to April is a possibility, I like that too. At least the person would be part of the council for a month, maybe even 6 weeks to work on the budget. Should they start the next day, which I assume that's how that works.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
All right,
It
John.
also sound, I'm sorry. I keep
No, go
forgetting
ahead,
about
John.
it. It also sounds like, Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, that most critical, I mean, we can obviously, as we gather information, find out when the state, and if the state's going to move these primary elections, but it sounds like most important to you is you need what, 4, 8, 10 weeks, 2.5 months between the beginning of pulling papers and the election for you to actually manage the election process. And if we keep in mind, 2.5 months and set the election date, and that this draft chart is not going to be dealt with in real time until at best the special town meeting in the fall. So
Right. I do think that would be, about ideal, something around that amount of time. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the lady who just spoke from the Collins Center, but it's absolutely true. It's been, changing the primary has been on there, or setting a standard primary date has been on there for years. The city and town clerks have pushed for a mid-June date. As the lady who just spoke said, they're looking at May. I mean, I guess I would hope that if a date was set in this charter and then the state had, or a time frame, a month was set in this charter and the state had chosen a permanent primary date, I would hope maybe there'd be an opportunity for us to pivot, just to keep us, to prevent us from having dual elections. Yeah, I think that's about all I have to
Okay.
say there. Yeah. And then the last couple of things, the precincts, I know that's our local act, and the state law, the rest of it certainly looks great to me.
terrific. Any other questions for Nancy? Nancy, I have one that's completely off this topic, but as long as you're available to be asked, has the select board decided on a special town meeting? And if this committee would like to get an article on that special town meeting warrant, when would the papers be available, and how many
Well,
signatures do we need?
The select board hasn't voted that I'm aware of on the special town meeting yet, but it seems pretty definite that it will be the third week in November. I think with all due likelihood, I've talked to Libby about it, we're going to have a special town meeting in November, which would lead me to believe that the papers would probably be, the article papers would probably be available in August. But it hasn't been voted on yet that
Right.
I'm aware of. Yeah.
Joe,
Anthony?
yeah, if I can't, I just want to make sure I clarify something. No matter when the election date is, the committee will choose what date it is. You, Nancy, are recommending that you need at least 2.5 to 3 months for when the nomination papers will be available.
Yeah, thank you. I think 3 might be a little long, but the way we do it now, we have about 10 weeks that we allow candidates to have their papers, which we can set the amount of time. That's, I guess the statute is silent on that. We've traditionally allowed them to have their papers and gather their signatures for about 6 weeks. We get them back, and then the deadline to withdraw is mandated, I believe, 33 days before an election. So yeah.
I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, last call for any questions for Nancy? All right, seeing none, Nancy, I think you're free to go.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to stay on and listen for a while. Thank you so much for your time, everybody.
Thank you for your time.
Yep, thanks, Nancy. Appreciate it.
All right, so kind of moving down the list, I don't think we have any new minutes to review and accept from this one. So we're moved on to item 5, open discussion and review of the remaining draft town charter sections by the Collins section. So I'll turn it over to Anthony.
I believe this was, I circulated the sort of most up-to-date version of the what we've adopted in the charter already. I believe that I think Joe was managing it before, but I think you guys were going through it section by section.
I was, and I've sort of dropped the ball on this one. I think what I was anticipating here, Jeff, was that we would go over the last, I think it's 2 or 3 sections in the draft charter, kind of paragraph by paragraph. I don't have a copy of the charter with me or to look at. So if one of you guys there in the room can walk through it, that'd be great. If not, I think we'll have to hold that to the next meeting.
Okay. Copy here, 1 second. So I think the last sections we had left, I believe, wasn't just Article 10 that we had left to do?
Transition and, the other one is elections, I think, which we kind
Yeah,
of just
we
talked
just kind of
about,
talked
but
about.
I think it's just 10. The transition provision, that's the only 2.
No, that's all I had left. Did you guys want to walk us through Article 10?
Sure. Pat, do you want to lead this discussion? And we also sent you, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. We also sent you a memo that sort of has a little chart that sort of simplifies what the transition would look like. But I don't know, Pat, do you want me to put up the language or the chart?
It would be great if you put up the chart first.
Okay. So you can start. I'm gonna find it and I'll put it up.
Okay. So what we've done with the transition language, I don't know if you've had a chance to look through it, is talk about a process for how we would move from one form of government to the other, leaving some overlap in between to make sure there's always someone in charge of the local government. So we are, let's see, making some, okay. I'm just looking at this. I thought it started earlier, but let's talk about, let's consider if you have a special town meeting in November, and this is on the town, I want to start even before this, and then we'll go into what's in the transition. If there is a town meeting in November, and if this passes town meeting, then it's going to go to the legislature for their approval. We don't know how long this will take. It could be a quick approval, it could take much longer. So when we talk about the transition language, we use phrases like in the year after this is passed by the legislature and ratified. So we're not going to put specific years on it, but this chart is a little bit of a guideline as to how we think it will go. And we'll talk about the language afterwards. Assuming that the charter is approved by the legislature and signed by the governor, it will then go to the voters to be ratified. If all goes well and it happens pretty quickly, that could be in your May election next year. So 2026, let's assume the charter is adopted and ratified. Okay, so that really is going to be, we'll call that, the effective date of the charter. Now, once the charter is in effect, there'll be kind of a rollout over the next few elections. Over the next election. This anticipates right away when the charter is adopted, we think it will be May. If the legislature isn't done in May, it may not the effective date might not be till a special election in June, July, August, whenever this comes before it. So at the next, what we're talking about is it's not going to happen right away. It's not the day that the vote goes through, the lights aren't turned out on the old government and the lights turned back up on the council manager. Generally, there will be a period of time where both the select board is in effect until the next general election, and town meeting is still in place. And a few months before that, and we put February 2027, we would anticipate a special election of the first town council. None of the other positions would be on the ballot, but the first town council would have a special election. And the purpose of this is to get them together and going and picking a chair and creating rules and getting in place a system by which they'll be able to appoint a town manager and continue the government as soon as the first elections after the ratification occur. So we anticipate in about February, there will be an election for just the new town council. So their first term of office will be a year and a few months. Okay. Given that there's 9 members, generally what will happen will be the person with the 3 with the most votes will get 3-year terms. The second most votes would get 2-year terms, and those with the fewest votes would get 1-year terms, so that you would continue to rotate through as you do now. At the same time, from February until we said May, well, until, you know, what's going to happen is from February on until the next election, you'll have both this town council as well as your select board will be continuing to act. Now, and we will discuss having provisions for a liaison so that the new town council is paying attention to what the select board is doing, make sure everyone's in agreement. So there'll be a little bit of overlap, although it's really the select board still in charge. The reason for that is you'll also be having a regular town meeting the following, it's generally in May, but the following May after the ratification. So at that time, they will be setting a budget for the first year, and because really you're not going to be able to change governments in the middle of a budget session in the middle of it. There's a little time. And then the first regular elections would occur a year after the ratification. We put down June 2027. We will definitely talk a little more about how we want to word that date. It may be that we word a range of dates and have, you know, have that narrowed down after we find out when the state primaries are. At that point, there's a regular town election. There's no council seats on the ballot because they will have already been elected in February. And at that point, the town meeting is dissolved. The town council takes over as the legislative body, and the town council appoints the town manager to take over as the executive. And then at that same time in June, you have your regular election for all of the other elected positions that you're still continuing on to have. For all of the other elected positions, you will keep the same rotation so that, you know, whoever in 2026 was elected, they have their 3-year terms and the rest just cycle through. So for everyone other than the council, that will be the same type of election schedule. For the council, they'll have everyone will be voted back in February and they'll rotate through. I know that you've talked a little bit about automatically having some select board members become part of the council. Generally, we don't recommend that because it's really a different function. These people are moving from the executive branch to the legislative branch. It's a different function, as well as the fact that the select board will continue to operate for the year after that. They can certainly run for town council. You know, so there will be 2 bodies for that short period of time. So, you know, based by June 2028, there'll be a regular town election and everything will have changed over. We also, when Anthony shows us the language, we'll go through, there's some language for things in the transition, like getting up to speed on updating bylaws and things like that you need to do. And that's really going to happen in that course of a year in between as well.
All right. Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Absolutely. I was going to take a breath and ask for questions.
Curtis?
Okay, Curtis, I want to go back to Nancy's comment about lead time for elections, and I go back to the February date for the special election. I'm just wondering how far back we'd have to go to start getting papers out, and if that's a realistic time, or we should look carefully at February versus some other time, given what Nancy just told us?
You know, absolutely. I think it's all going to start from when you decide that your regular elections are going to be. If you decide to implement those in June, because we don't know when the primaries are going to be, if you want to keep it where it is, then you can count back from there. But you really want a good, couple of months. We put in February. That's what I've seen in other situations where there's been a transfer, but you could make it March if that would be better. But there needs to be a few months of transition time. So the exact February date, we put that in there, but we can also look into whether that works. Now that we know
Pat.
that we need 10 weeks, we can look at a calendar and count back 10 weeks and see what the date is that makes the most sense to you. We can talk through the concepts and then, sit down with the calendar and work backwards after you've made a decision about what the date is that you want to have for the regular election.
Pat, if I could just add, just
Sure.
about this special election in February, it is just that it would follow. It's not like your regular election, so it'll have some time baked into it that's different than what we put in the charter for the regular elections in terms of that 10-week time period. But this is a different special election specifically for the purposes of starting this new form of government. So regardless of what we put in for the regular elections in the election section of the charter, this is specifically about the transition, and then there can be, no matter when you set it, the timeline that makes sense for the clerk in terms of making sure people can have their papers in and so forth. So think of this election as separate from the ones we talked about in terms of the regular election.
Yeah, you're on it for a year and a half before you have to get it.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions? I know Curtis said, I thought I heard something.
No,
else. All right, Donna?
Yeah, I'm curious, when this goes before the state legislature, can we anticipate any questions they might have regarding moving towards approval, or what kinds of issues do they raise?
Absolutely. What I have seen happen, first of all, when you put it in as a special act, there are a couple ways of doing it. You can put it in and say, we want a thumbs up or thumbs down, no wording changes, exactly as is. If you say no, we'll walk away. There's another type where you say to the legislature, make any changes you think are necessary. The third way is kind of a combination between the two, where you ask the legislature, if you don't like something, can you come back to us and we'll talk about changing it? And so there will be some give and take on the language once you get in front of the legislature. I have heard questions asked from feedback I've seen from other special acts. There might be questions like, how do we know the public's behind this? What type of public participation did you have? That they're very interested in making sure that this is something that residents want, and where you are going to have this before an open town meeting. That almost answers their question, because if open town meeting has pushed it through this far, it's something that the residents are interested in moving forward with. So there may be questions about that. In general, I don't think that we've proposed anything unusual or new or out of order that they're going to have any in-depth questions about. A lot of it mirrors things that are already being done around the state. I'll probably, let me ask Mel and Anthony if you have any other ideas for types of questions that might be asked.
Well, I agree with you, Pat. I think primarily they'll want to know in Nantucket, how strong was the town meeting vote? And of course, in Nantucket, the vote is an open town meeting, so I think that helps. If it's a good town meeting vote, then I don't think they're gonna really have too many political issues. They may have some legal and wording issues, but as Pat said, we feel pretty comfortable with the consistent language that's in this charter.
I think Joe had a question. Joe, you're on mute.
I was just kind of curious about the timeline, Pat. Obviously the starting of the process will be whatever special or annual town meeting the article gets presented to. Presumably it gets approved by the town meeting. It goes to the State House. My understanding is that you don't know how long the State House legislature is going to take to okay it, but does it sort of come out of their process on a certain date, like the legislative year ends in March 31st or something, and so either the governor is going to sign it or they're not by March 31. What I'm wondering about is if they come back and say yes in August, does that sort of screw up the whole process, given that we have to have elections and set those dates for those elections out after the legislature actually again, assuming that they approve it, which I presume they would. I don't, kind of a jumble question, but I'm just trying to figure out how do all these things sort of follow each other. If the legislature, you don't know when they're going to come back to you, and whether they come back to you in 3 months or 9 months or 12 months or 18 months, does that all do all these elections, the town meeting and elections presumably are going to occur on the dates that we've set them for?
Right. So, it is impossible to know. In the transition section, there's usually something written in that says that if there's, essentially a problem with interpretation, or if something needs to be changed in the transition, the select board can fix that. So, if the select board says, if it comes out, it depends. If they approve it, say, I believe it would be July before they left their session, or the end of, if the end of July. If they approve it a little bit late, the town can make a decision of can they get this in front, how quickly can they get this in front of the voters, and whether or not you can be on track or not. There will be something in the transition section that kind of gives the select board the authority to, acting within the spirit of what the transition section says, to fine tune any, deadline issues that occur.
Pat, it might make sense. That's a good transition to actually talk about that, bring the language up, because
Right.
that flexibility is in the language. So I don't know if you have it in front of you. I'm trying to find it to pull up the actual that you wrote.
It would be great if you could pull that up. I think you sent it as a separate document in an email. But in the meantime, were there some other general questions that we can answer about the timeline before we get into the language?
Sure. Lucy?
Hi, I'm Lucy Ahern. So the February election, we're gonna elect 9 council members then. So the select board members, they can't apply to run at that
They
time.
absolutely can. The select board members can apply, and then they would serve on both for that couple of months during the transition period.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, I would anticipate that may happen. That even helps with the communication between the two boards during this transition period, if there are some who are on both.
I have a follow-up question. Would that apply to the town manager as well, like changing over, or what happens there?
The town manager would not necessarily change over. That's really up to, that's going to be up to the town council, whether they appoint them when they start their term or not. I'm sure there will be discussions long before that as to what's going to happen. It's not an automatic rolling over because it's a different type of position.
Thank you.
So does that mean that the town manager has to reapply for his or her job?
I would say that's going to be up to the transition team, how that's going to work. Mel, do you have any input on that?
No, you're right. There's no, well, the town manager probably has a contract, and so the terms of that contract will probably have to be considered. But it's really up to the town council how they want to handle it, whether they want to have a search, whether they want to, carry over, maybe even create an acting town manager for a period, it's really totally up to them.
Thanks.
There may be some provision, you know, that as Mel said, that there is, that the current town manager serves as an acting, you know, until they make that decision. As Mel said, it's gonna be up to the town council.
Anyone
Mr.
else?
Chair.
Hey,
Oh, Tom?
Yeah, I would just note that the town manager has an ongoing contract that gets renegotiated by the board periodically. So that would be something that if this were to happen, that we'd have to keep a serious eye on.
mhm.
Because that may get complicated.
Yeah.
Tom, may I, through the chair, could you clarify, do you mean that the town manager's contract supersedes the charter change if it were passed? And that the town manager, our current town manager would stay in that role until the contract is up, and then a new town council would have the opportunity to reappoint?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Caroline. Caroline, I'm not sure about the process and what would supersede what, but in the most general sense, a contract is a contract, and I think we just have to, that should be thought of before anything were to be passed or put into place where the ball was rolling. That's my only point.
Jill?
Yeah, it's the timing of it. So whatever year is passed and look at the year of that person's contract. So.
I just make her act.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Do you guys want to walk us through the language of this section?
What the year is or the.
Anthony, can you scroll up to the top of this section? I think you started on 7. There we go. The first few provisions are really standard provisions. Section 10.1, continuation of existing laws. It basically means that everything that's in force when the charter takes effect continues unless it's amended or appealed, unless there's an inconsistency with the charter. And wherever there's an inconsistency with the charter will prevail. So you're not starting from scratch with your, with your bylaws and with the, decisions that you've made over the years, unless they conflict with the charter. And later on, we'll talk a little bit about the study committees that will need to be formed to look at the bylaws. Section 2 just talks about all agencies and officials continue to perform their jobs until reappointed or until successors are duly appointed or duties have transferred. This isn't intended to be a, you're not going to lose all of your agencies and officials and start over. It will continue on, and only the changes that are indicated in the charter will be made. 10.3, it's kind of a formality, transferring records and property. So anything that from the old form of government is transferred to the new form of government as far as documents, etc., properties, etc. If the town is on the deed, the town's new government continues to hold that deed. Continuation of personnel. Anyone in the service of the town continues in their position until, retains their duties until provisions have been made by the performance of the duties by another person or agency. So there's continuity in the employees that you have. 10.5 is just kind of legalese, saying that any contracts that were entered into by the town meeting form of government will continue to be in effect for this town council form of government. So 6 and 7, if you can scroll down a little bit, Anthony, it's starting to get into what we've showed you with the chart. So the charter becomes effective when it's ratified by voters. And I may put something in there ratified by voters, depending on the language, just after approval by the legislature and signature by the governor. That's often in there, that language. I might add that in there. Section 10, the first talks about this first special election, and we can sit down and, you know, we should talk about dates when we're finished going through this, so that we can work backwards and look at a calendar. But the first special election is held on the first Tuesday in February. And that's where I discussed there'll be 9 candidates, and depending on how many votes they get, they'll be either 3, 2, or 1-year terms. Ties are resolved by a flip of a coin. And it specifically states in section B that if an incumbent member of the select board, actually we have to cross out or an incumbent town meeting member, because that's not applicable in your case, open town meeting.
One
the-
information.
Yes, Curtis?
Excuse me, but, let's say there are 12 candidates on the ballot. The top 9 are the ones that get elected, and then the 3-3-3, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if there's 12 or 15 candidates, you're still electing the top 9 to the job.
Correct.
Okay,
So incumbent members of the select board are allowed to continue to serve in both positions until the select board ceases to exist on the first business day following the regular June election. So in section 2.2 of the charter shall not apply. 2.2 is the section that says that you can't serve on the town council and another elected position. But in this case, you can serve, and in this case only during this transition period, you can serve both on the town council and on the select board. And as soon as, right after this special election, the clerk gets the elected people together for the purpose of, let's see. I feel like I lost my place, but for the purpose of a very limited purpose, and that is to develop rules and regulations. And let's see. Okay, thank you. So, and to govern temporary rules and understand the conduct. So the initial town council will not be governing as much as selecting their chair, creating rules, and developing a system by which they will choose the town manager. And that's the part that you talked about. Now, but they'll be taking into account the town manager's contract, the town manager's willingness and desire to continue serving, and you know what the next steps will be. Okay. And during this time, they talk, sometimes there has to be something in place of what happens if more than 2 vacancies occur on the select board. If somebody drops out, someone says, I'm done, I don't want to be in this transition role. And during this time, the town council can appoint select board members enough to keep their quorum and continue operating if for some reason that select board members don't want to fulfill their term during this transition period. Okay. Section 10.8, the first year following the ratification of the charter is the first regular election. We said second Tuesday in June, and we'll have further conversations about this after we go through. And at that time, the town clerk, incumbent members of the school committee, historic district, all of the elected boards will have their regular elections, and they'll serve the remainder of their terms. If some have were expiring during that year, they will be running for office again. Because you've chosen to no longer have elected Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, there's an exception for them. It says that upon expiration of their terms, the position shall become appointed. Now, because the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board was established by special act, you know, that's really an area where your town council is going to have to look at that very closely and make sure that this language and the language that we talk about later is going to be a part of, you know, just to make sure, because what you're really doing is changing a prior special act whereby they were elected into appointed positions. But that's something for, you know, your lawyers and the drafters to figure out and make sure that that makes sense. Okay, section 1011, the select board is continued to be responsible for the general operation and business of town and performs all of this until the first regular June election. At which point the select board ceases to exist. So you really have someone in place for a full year after the ratification of this to go through the regular town procedures to adopt a budget and make sure that everything is in place for the town council to start out. Okay, 10-12, we had talked about this, and you may want to wait until we go through the whole thing and then come back and talk about this some more. What's going to need to happen for the first town council members, there has to be a decision about what are the first town council members going to get paid. After that, the council sets their salary under section 2.4. So in general, in the past and in some other charters, what happens is, whatever the salary was, and that should say 25 probably, whatever the salary was of select board members will continue for the first year. However, I know you've had a number of discussions about wanting to raise that starting one. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit after we finish this section. Okay, so this is section 1013 is the section we talked about before, is the select board has the authority to adopt measures which clarify, confirm, or extend any of the transitional provisions in order that such transition may be made in the most expeditious and least contentious manner possible. So the select board, which continues to be in place after this, really helps to guide this transition period. And if something has to be tweaked, for example, if you put in a June election and that's not going to work because the primary, they can tweak some of those things. And it should be, made in a manner consistent with what the charter has chosen. Okay. 1014 talks about the establishment of a bylaw review committee. So right after it's ratified by voters, the select board is going to want to appoint a bylaw review committee to go through the town's bylaws and point out the areas that are going to need to be updated kind of on day one when the council takes over. So they'll have a year to do it if the election, if you're finished up and the ratification is in May. If not, it may roll over a little bit. So, that's a really important component of this, is to make sure that the bylaws now line up with what the charter says. The next section, 1015.
Joe, did you have a question real quick?
Please do.
He was wiggling his fingers.
Oh, was that me? Sorry, no.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Patricia.
Oh, okay, great. And please stop me because your faces are all very small on the side now, so I can't see if someone's raising their hand. So the next section, we had talked about the capital and program committee and audit committee continuing, and you might want to have some discussions about what shape or form that's going to take place. With this new form of government, there are different roles, the executive's different, and there may be new duties for the capital program committee and audit committee. So rather than you projecting out and trying to figure out what changes there might be, similar to the bylaw review, there will be a committee established to look into the duties and responsibilities of these two committees and make recommendations to the newly formed town council about their existence, makeup, and duties. And what, for example, recommendations including whether they continue to exist, the number of members, qualifications, and method of member appointments, and the advisory duties of these two committees. So this is an opportunity because really the makeup of these two committees could probably take up an entire study committee of its own, independent of this, of your committee here. So this is an opportunity for someone to take a look at these in really great detail. Some of you may choose to be on that or be part of the bylaw review committee or continue to function on these committees to help guide this through. Okay. Section 1016, we have looked at, I should say Mel has looked at some of your special acts and taken a look at which ones might need to be changed under this committee. This is really an area that should be thoroughly reviewed by your town council. We have, your public records of special acts. There may be something in that you do particularly, or a special act that's pending, that's not through yet, that might need to be addressed. But basically, this talks about what the duties are for these special act. For example, like we talked about the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, how those elected positions will become appointed positions and rotate through. So that will be for town council to look at these, see which ones are completely repealed, which ones are just changed. Maybe the appointing authority changes from the select board to the town council. And if you can scroll down a little bit more, Anthony, was that it? Yeah. That's really an area where it needs to be carefully analyzed by your town council. Okay.
Mel had a comment real quickly.
Sure.
Yeah, quickly, this is really important section because as Pat showed earlier in the transition section, there's a premise that the charter is, while special acts can continue, the charter is primary, and if there are inconsistencies. And so what we want to make sure, and taking the cue from your committee, is that any boards and committees that have been created by a special act should continue, and with the only exception of being the Harbor and Shellfish Board, as Pat said, would continue, but convert to an appointed board. The other boards that are listed here, and by the way, I did notice that the Water Commission is missing from this. It should be the last one, number 8. It was a special act, and I think around 2020. So that should be there. But you've got, you're making sure that your Cemetery Commission, your Board of Health, and all the bodies that have been created by special act would continue under this charter. The only difference is, and we say it in each case, if there's any reference in the special act to selectmen or to town meeting, those would be assumed by the town council. So if that's not acceptable to you for whatever reason, we'd have to change that, but that's the assumption there. And then the other part is that we are proposing, I think given the way that this charter is written and the new executive, is that the special acts that created a Board of Public Works and a sewer commission would be eliminated, and those would be just assumed by the executive body of the town.
I think Joe had a question too.
Yeah, I assume, Patricia and Mel, that, if KP Law goes through this and, comes back and says, this is, I don't know, I'm making it up, but, number 6 or number 7 under these various, special acts, this is really a bad idea, town council study committee, for this and this reason, we should keep things the same, or we should not go in the direction that you're suggesting here. Clearly, that's sort of an okay thing that, we take their input, and if it needs, I'm thinking like the Shellfish, if they come back and say, appointing this is really not a great way to do it, you really ought to keep it as an elected body, we can make that change to the charter. It's not, this isn't written in stone.
Well, I think, you're talking about legal issues, I think, as opposed to policy issues. I think you want to take advice from your counsel, but we definitely encourage this. And in this section in particular, it's very legally technical, and we encourage, and we would actually appreciate the opportunity to sit down with counsel and to help them understand what we've written about. So yes, but the answer is yes. Any legal issues should definitely be considered by the committee.
Okay, okay, fair enough, thanks.
Curtis?
Without prejudice, I am curious when we think we're gonna get this ready for KP Law to start looking at it, the package.
I think that's a good question.
Deathly silence.
Are you asking us or?
Can I make a comment about that first?
Sure, go ahead, Jill.
I don't know that KP Law is gonna look at this until we have our sense of the meeting vote. Yeah? I mean, they're not gonna do a full. They're not
Well,
gonna fully
that's my,
go through
my
that, that's what
question,
I was.
because Libby has kept
understanding.
saying that KP Law
Mhm.
really needs to look at something, and I just want to know what, when, and where. Not complaining, but I'm just looking at the timeline and where we go.
Yeah, I'm looking at, the way I understood from the select board is what I'm saying is that. They wanna have the sense of the meeting, then we have the ballot, then they have some information to say, you know. And in the meantime, can find out how much it's gonna cost from KP Law to go through it.
So not until after the next,
The way I
ballot.
interpreted that, the sense of the meeting and the ballot question. Is that was actually whether or not they would move forward with funding for KP Law. To drill down in the details on this charter. Because they said that they thought that was gonna be a big expense, but we never found out how
well,
much.
does Libby have an opinion about KP Law and what we're doing? She on?
We could ask her. No, she's dropped off.
Oh,
I think Bo had a comment.
I thought it was non-conditional.
The vote?
Yeah.
It might be, but I don't think, there's no money authorized. So if that's more than $50,000, that actually has to get authorized somehow. I think, Tom, unless I'm wrong, but
Wouldn't that be through Libby?
yeah, but with what money?
I mean,
She's the town manager. She would,
Yeah,
Well,
you guys,
so-
there's a process for
Still-
spending money.
I'm sure there's a process. I understand that. But what I'm saying is we're trying to figure out who, and I think we should go to Libby and ask her, how do we proceed with this?
Oh my
well,
God.
I, just to throw my 2 cents in, I mean, I guess the way I saw this timeline working out. Was that we would complete the draft charter for the town. We have to complete the draft charter for the county, which. In our conversations with Anthony and company, it's supposed to be a fairly straightforward conversion. And then we're gonna have a draft charter for the town and a draft charter for the county. I would give it to Libby / KP Law right now. I agree with what everyone said is, there's. The select board will probably not want to take it up until we've gotten the results of the 2 non-binding votes, but. Once they happen, we're gonna know, okay, we had a good result and therefore this is gonna happen. It's gonna go on the special town meeting warrant, or gee whiz, it didn't work out so well. What do we want to do? But
Yeah,
I don't see any reason not to give the drafts to Libby and KP Law, and they want to look at them right away, great. They don't. It's up to what the select board wants to fund.
All right, I'm gonna go to Jill first for a follow-up and then to you, Patricia.
Yeah, I think it's fine to give it, and then I think KP Law can probably give an indication of, what that looks like in terms of price, like, hey, this looks pretty good, and it won't take that much time for us, or it doesn't like that. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But in terms of like actually going through, being ready for an article, that's something different.
All right, Patricia?
I have a question for you, and that is, where this is planned to be on town meeting as a non-binding question. In general, does your council review all of the items on the warrant and
Yes.
before then? So
Yes.
I would think that there would be at least a cursory review prior to town meeting. I don't know whether they'll consider that a thorough review, but I'm just curious if that might be part of the process.
might be.
I mean, yeah,
Right,
KP Law has already reviewed and okayed the language that's already in the warrant and on the ballot. So which is just a summary description of what this committee is attempting to accomplish. They want to look at the, the draft charter. Good for them. So.
Will you be
Carol?
having discussions on the actual charter language at town meeting as part of the, part of the, how long
I
will there
don't
be?
think so.
No,
No
it's not
discussion on
gonna
town
be
meeting floor.
discussed.
Okay.
I believe the moderators indicated there may be an ability for a very brief presentation, but not a lot of back and forth or discussion about the nitty gritty of the chart.
I will,
Sure, go ahead, Joe.
sorry, I did want to let y'all know I did see some emails from a group here that they do think that this is, the meeting is on the warrant to change our form of government, so I had to explain to them that's not what it was, so you might start getting some questions about that soon.
Right, Carolyn.
I just wanted to clarify through the chair. Tom, the town council didn't actually look at the charter, as far as you know? They just looked at our wording for how to put it on the sense of the meeting vote, the ballot, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Understand.
Good.
All right, I guess. In general, does anyone have any other questions about that section? I know we have a couple discussion points that were.
Mr.
flagged.
Chair,
Yeah, sure, Tom.
Pat, if I may ask you to put up that document again, the second to the third to last point, which was the bylaw committee and the Capcom audit committee part. I hate to be like negative or harp on kind of these things, and I know I've done that over however long we've been meeting, but I just have to say that looking at that section, it really makes me think like who maybe this is somewhat rhetorical, but I think it's something for all of us to think about. Really, in reality, I don't know who's going to be actually serving on those committees. And I would think if the government is in transition, and I mean, I hear pushback's not the right word, but I hear from people all the time who serve on top committees who have town meeting warrant stuff to do, that 2 town meetings a year is too much. And they're kind of, I ran for this select board seat. I knew what I was I knew mostly what I was getting myself into, right? But some of these appointed folks spend 27, just for one town meeting, 27 meetings, meeting over this stuff. And I'm concerned about the future of who is going to serve on these committees and how much time it is. As you all are well aware, Nantucket is an extremely expensive place to live. Everybody, or a lot of people, are working all the time, and there isn't a lot of bandwidth for this. So it's either going to be town staff who is already strapped for time and bandwidth, and or hiring consultants to basically shepherd these committees through. And I just think that's something that we really need to think about with all these committees, including the town council itself. Who is going to serve on these committees? And I know we can't solve for making sure they have good faith or not, that they're not doing things in bad faith, right? That's all out of our control. But I'm again, the last thing I'll say is I'm really concerned about who are these folks who are going to follow this through. So I'll leave it there, and I apologize for bringing this up once more.
I think those are really legitimate questions. One suggestion that I might have is for Capital Program Committee and Audit Committee. If you wanted to include something in there, you could say that you could name that a certain number of people from the Capital Program Committee and Audit Committee should serve on this committee, to have them involved in making these decisions. As far as the bylaw review, do you have a bylaw committee with your town meeting as is? Who is reviewing the bylaws that generally come before town meeting now?
The select board and town council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One second, what was next?
On that point, we have government study committees every 5 years. So I don't know, they could review bylaws. This is a dumb question, but when did we originate capital programs committee?
You know, I think that was in.
And whose duty was this before?
I know, Chrissy thought it wasn't that long ago, but I
mean,
Like who was doing this before? Was it the select board?
well, it's been in existence for at least 10 years because I was on the Capcom before I was on the FinCom. So that's 11, 12 years ago.
Was it new then, Joe?
I don't think so. No, it was a process to
were you on
review
with Nat?
capital items.
Were you on with Nat Lowell?
No,
Well-
I was not on with Nat Lowell.
I know Nat said he was on this committee for like 10 years, so I feel like it's going back a while.
Yeah.
If it says Article 2 Capital Program Committee adopted 4/5/1977. 18. By Article 23 approved August 30th, 1977.
Before you were born.
Stop it. We don't have to age people at this committee. But then established membership, it looks like it was amended and approved in 95, so I mean, I don't know.
So if it's gone on for that long, can we safely say?
I don't know what it did in 77 versus 95 and 2011. There's a bunch of different amendments to it, almost all the way through. It looks like it originated in 77,
Thank you.
so I don't know.
I wasn't. I mean, the town council could go and get rid of capital program committee if they want to, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Ways and means,
In fact, I would say you could do that and you could pay the people more for the work that they're doing. And then we just
Yeah,
adjust the rate.
I think it all goes back to that. What are you paying these people? Because how many hours do you think they're gonna spend? What are we gonna pay them? And I think that's where we're really running into a few problems. You know, because if we think they're gonna assume all the responsibility and have all the authority, then I think they probably need to get paid to reflect that.
Mr. Chair, may I
Yes,
say
Donna.
something? I had an interruption, so I'm not sure where I am at this point, but don't forget the non-voting taxpayers as far as people joining committees. Don't forget us. Because there are a lot of us who would like to volunteer on committees. And where appropriate, please keep us in mind. Thank you.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, the compensation point is a discussion point called out in this section specifically. So I guess if people are interested, I mean, we can certainly throw it out for thoughts from the.
Well, we are running into a few things,
Yeah.
like, we've got more things to address, I think, in the charter that aren't totally worked out in my view.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to that, so I think that was right to bring it up.
All right, go ahead.
So there are some things that the FinCom does, which will just have to be part of Ways and Means, if that's what we're gonna do with it. You would approve things like free cash.
Town council's gonna do that.
Right. I'm just laying out the things that FinCom does currently, and then on a Saturday, review the operating budget with the department heads.
That's all gonna go. Don't you think?
Yes, so
Yep.
then,
They're done.
so FinCom's out. The stuff on Ways and Means would just be capital committee. I mean, look, this is my opinion, because I think this is really the meat and potatoes of what government does, especially capital committee, because you're talking about a long-term investment, and electing the people that are gonna make those decisions, I think just seems like the appropriate thing to do. Like, you need to draw a line to that person's idea that they're gonna, provide sewer or whatever it is. So I think it's an important role for town council to be involved in doing this so that you have accountability. And I mean, I think the, ancillary problem to this is how much you pay them, but I don't really think, I think this is just a market question. It's really not that complicated.
Well, the only thing I totally agree with what you're saying. It's more. Let's say you don't have a capital program committee, which. Or you don't, like, the sewer commission has to meet, they're gonna have to go over planning laws, they gotta go over all the bylaws, because they're assuming the role of the finance committee. Right, they're mostly assuming they're capital, I can totally see having capital program, because. Like this year, we looked at $266 million, so there was a lot to go through, but. If they're asked to go to all these other meetings and do more than what they're doing now, then I think they gotta get paid something real. I know I can just speak for Denise, I'm not trying to speak for Denise Cronow, she's the head of the finance committee, but I mean, she thinks we ought to pay people like real money. And make it their job, but then if you do that, they would need to be going to all these meetings and forming all these committees, and they would be on those committees, and if they wanted to pull in people who were appointed, then they could. Right?
It's just that it's the natural tendency to delegate out. Especially when you're kind of overloaded, and maybe that's. I don't know, it's a dicey question, but it is a natural tendency to be like, okay, you're handling this, I don't wanna, like. I watched the meeting where you presented at select board. And you spent 10 minutes talking about what you did, and then the select board was like, great, thank you. That was like 5 minutes of. I mean, it's completely delegated out at this point.
Well. But our process is a little trickier than that, right? So yes, they approved the report that we wrote. So I assume they've read the report when we went. But after that, then some of those items, right, are going on the ballot and they're going on the warrant. So that has to go through the FinCom process. So then there's that added layer, that added step. You might have seen last night, the finance committee looked at our Island Home. Capcom said no to our Island Home. FinCom gave it a motion to adopt. So, and that doesn't happen that much. But it has happened a few times. So again, I think you're right, I mean, we're talking about making these laws, but I think it's gotta be on these people who were paying and voting.
I agree.
All right, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think Jill's last point is correct. You have to rely on this new form of government to do this work. But I think they should be paid properly. And I think you should do market rates, because you're trying to get 9 people elected, which means you want in excess of a dozen people willing to come forward and to work, 500 plus hours before thinking time per year. I believe you must pay them properly. And I would encourage this group to pick that up and maybe to be rather unique in the Commonwealth on that.
Carolyn?
To Bo's point earlier. You were talking about the importance of elections so that the voters can see the different choices. This person likes this angle and this person likes another angle. So I get a legislative chance to pick what I'm interested in by choosing that person. Whereas appointment, not that way. And Jill, you're talking about how we're all talking about how important it is to pay them enough to basically ensure their performance, to ensure that they have the will and the sense of responsibility to cover a large range, which is going to better inform them at any single level, any decision that they're making, if they know more, if they're more interconnected amongst different responsibilities and functions. But if we're only gonna get 9 people, Jeremy, you said, we need at least 12 people to be willing to run in order to fill 9 seats. I'm concerned about that, because that doesn't give the voters any choice. If there's not enough types of people running, then you don't get to express what you are interested in as a voter. And so then that, I think that is going to skew things more than we might feel. Those might criticize the way it is now, more than maybe it is now. So I'm just wondering if we could talk some about that.
Sure, go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, I think if you pay these people $100,000 each, you're gonna get a lot of people to run.
More than just the 12 for them.
Yeah,
And you have more choice.
So that would be good.
I think if you're paying 30, I don't know about that, can't really, you know.
All right, go ahead, Curtis.
I've looked at the pay schedules around the Commonwealth. And there are a lot of communities where the range might be 13 to 30. And I wonder if Collins has any information that they could share. I don't know of any place where you pay 100 or 125,000 for a counselor or a selectman.
Pat, do you have that salary research?
I do. I'm gonna just describe it to you because it's not an easy format to share, although I can put it in a format and send it to you later. But I can tell you there seems to be a very big difference between how council managers, forms of government pay their counselors than mayor council forms of government. When you look at council manager forms, it really ranges from them not getting paid at all, or up to maybe $12,000 or $15,000 a year. So that is going to be the range for council manager. That doesn't mean that has to be what you pay. We have a separate survey that we had put out for the mayor council and forms of government. And there's a much larger range. Let's see. Let me see here. It tends to be, but not that much larger. We're talking 13,000, 16,000 for president, 14 for less. I don't have the information. There are a couple that are more, like Cambridge, depending on where they're located. And I think we could probably pull together some of those. It's not in the form. There are some missing numbers in the format that I have. But in general, the mayors, for whatever reason, seem to have a little higher salaries. But it is not that as significant as you're talking about. So it's really something that you're going to have to do what's right for your community. It's what your community wants. Mayor councils, like I said, tend to be 15,000 is a lot for them.
So,
All right, Jeremy, I'll go to Jeremy.
Patricia, is there any way to figure out the amount of time approximately that these people in other communities devote to these actions, these governmental actions? And also, given that the annual cash operating expense and capital expense of Nantucket is approaching, maybe even exceeding $300 million, it seems to me that we need some differentiation in looking at other towns in the Commonwealth and Nantucket, as I have a sense that the government here spends a lot more time and a lot more money than some of these other towns.
I can tell you, there are no studies on how many hours are put in across the Commonwealth.
No, it's a qualitative assessment.
Right. It's certainly something that, you know, we can probably, well, talk to Anthony and Mel, but we can zero in on a couple of communities and ask those questions. I do know that, you know, even in Cambridge, they're considered part-time. It's not considered a full-time position. In fact, they've had conversations about whether they should consider it a full-time position, but it's considered part-time. So most of these are not being given full-time salaries.
All right, Joe.
Jeff, you know, through you to Tom, I'd be curious, Tom, if you would share your reaction or thoughts to, you know, the select board. There's a modest stipend now that you all get, but if the compensation was $15,000 a year, $25,000 a year, $40,000, I'm just picking numbers. do you think it would drive, would that change your view of the position of the task? Do you think it would get more quality people to consider running and be on the town council or being part of town government at the peak there? What do you think?
I have so many thoughts on this, but I'll try and keep them brief. And I think that probably Mel has quite a bit of thoughts on this as well, because he's alluded to some things in previous meetings. One other thing with paying, like state legislators, right? Like state rep starts at around, I don't know, what's it, 72 now, right? And depending on what community you live in, and going back and forth to the state house, yes, you do get a travel budget a little bit and all that, right? Like there are many state legislators who work other jobs as well, lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. So those things, I think for Nantucket, and we've talked about this so many times, everyone knows, is such a unique place. And we are so far on the outlier scale of anywhere else that I think that for a block of people, if say the compensation for select board, right now, were to suddenly go to 25,000, right, a year, plus the ability to buy in the town's health insurance pool, right? I think some people would be like, that's interesting. Then maybe I could work full time, but then it was sort of a part-time job and I wouldn't have to have something else on the side or whatever. That may make a difference. But I can tell you that to Bo's point before about Capital Committee and when they came to us, I talked to multiple members of Capcom about that report already. I had read it. I had spent time talking to people about that vote, et cetera. So the thing is, once you're in this spot and how many people reach out and how many conversations you have in Stop and Shop and your family's interested in what's going on, that it's so beyond a full-time job if you really want to. And I'm not saying I'm the analog or the example for this, but that's what I think that somebody, if they were suddenly in my shoes or Matt Fee, and many people more reach out to Matt and Brooke because they're the chair and vice chair, right? And Matt knows every single human being on Nantucket, right? Is that you got to be the right person who is willing to do that basically 24/7 in some ways. Matt has talked about that he has people texting him at midnight about select board stuff, right? So yeah, it's a unique case, but it's paying somebody $100,000 is one thing, but does that invite unstable government because then they're expected to be ambitious and do big things, and maybe having the lower pay scale and it being a balance is a better thing. I don't know. Mel's alluded to this before, and I would be interested in what he thinks on this. To answer your question, Joe, in a very long-winded way, I think for some it may, but I don't think it would be, oh, well, now we suddenly have 16 candidates who are viable for select board every year. I don't think that's the case.
Well, I agree with you, Tom, on that last point. I mean, I actually think I am, and I think I've said this at previous meetings, I favor increasing the stipend for the prospective town council, but I don't think $100,000 is going to necessarily drag more people out of the woodwork. I think it's just like it is in many other towns. People who are interested in public service find their way to these jobs, and I just think that having a more substantial pay may shake the tree a little bit better. So,
all right. Well, then Curtis.
Okay, quick question for the council. So is it generally true that town council forms have a Ways and Means or some kind of committee to handle finance?
It's generally true that there'll be, I mean, it's a little funny because it's different than I think what you've experienced, is that a committee that is some subsection of the existing members of the council will have a committee dedicated to finance or to audit, and they will meet with those departments regularly throughout the year. What generally happens during the budget process is the council will meet as a whole to consider the budget as presented to them, have hearings with the various departments, have opportunities for public input, and then adopt the budget.
Curtis?
I just want to observe that in a place like Nantucket, we get a lot of people who have fulfilled very high-level positions in, off the island. They've come here, they're committed. But the experience that they bring is very important. And I do think we should raise the basic stipend. I think I agree with Joe that even if you say 100, you're not going to get the people. It's not going to make you experienced enough to fill these jobs. And that's where this volunteer core that we have in this community is very important.
That is true. I agree with that. I think one thing about the boards is it's kind of a feeder system for people to run for office too. So there are some boards, but I think this town council is going to recognize that. And I think that they're going to have some people that they're going to appoint to boards and they will want some help.
Nice. Any other thoughts on this for anyone? Any of the public? Want to throw their 2 cents in? You don't have to, it's up to you.
Yeah, well,
Sure,
thank you, thank you, yes, Lucy Hare. So, I do like the idea of 100,000 or like, you know, because it's going to, like, if you don't have, because otherwise you're gonna get like semi-retired people, like retired people. You're not gonna get like the kind of the working group, you know, if it's only gonna be 15,000 and stuff, the people who kind of really know Nantucket, you know, so.
Good point.
Much to think about. All right, go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Tom's invitation to just recap what I had previously talked about when we were talking about this change of form of government. You are moving to a much different form of government than a town form of government. So the select board will no longer be in place. All of that executive authority will be concentrated in an appointed town manager. And I expect the town manager to be doing a lot of things that perhaps a capital, planning committee might do. And so it doesn't mean you don't want a capital planning committee or a capital advisory committee or something to that effect, but the work will be done more of in the executive administrative function, and then be passed on to the council to deliberate and to act on. They're not going to be creating things. They're going to be responding to the executives. So whether that means they should get more than the select board or not, I can't answer that, but I will say that they will be considered a part-time body. I don't see any way that they're going to be full-time. Now, there will be some counselors, as there are current select board members, who spend more time than others. I've seen select board members spend, 40, 50 hours a week, and I've seen some spend literally nothing, other than going to a board meeting. So those are just some random thoughts there.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mel. And if we look at the warrant, which is the best way to evaluate, how things operate, especially in terms of bylaws, the warrant has got a lot of budgetary, and it's got citizen warrant articles, it's got planning articles, but like in terms of real bylaws that the town passes, like how many bylaws a year are they doing? And then how many rules are you putting forward? I mean, that might help us a little bit if we kind of could, I don't know how we could capture that information.
That's a good question. Jason?
Basically, Mel, you just told us that, if town manager is going to be handling the origination of capital items, then basically capital committee is just responding to those or altering or amending those items as they come down from town manager. So the capital programs committee as it is going to change.
That's kind of how it works now.
Yeah.
Don't you use a ranking system? And
That was generated by the committee. And that people liked that, and then the finance department decided to start ranking things too.
okay,
Makes sense.
so finance ranks and then you amend.
They rank, I think Brian was just talking about this yesterday. And it's on our committee yesterday that we met. They get, request from the department heads. Right? It goes to the finance department. Then the town manager and Brian Turbot, and I forgot who else, but I think Rick Sears, you know, the town manager, the deputy town managers, the finance department, they rank what of the requests they got, they rank what they think are the top priorities. And ultimately that comes to us. And then then we evaluate each one individually and then, you know, we rank them just for our own discussion. So it doesn't have, we don't know what their rankings are. And I think that that's fine. And I think they use it for their own internal discussions too, about kind of what is the best thing, like, should we put forward, you know, to pave this road this year or what, but that's really my understanding.
So if you don't know what their ranking is. And you
I
get,
do know what the ranking is because I see what they put forward and those are their top priorities. I don't think they're gonna, right?
okay,
So I kind of know conceptually,
Yeah.
this is their priority, or it's a priority for maybe Jeff. And, you know, Libby honors Jeff's request for that.
okay, so but if you don't agree with it. Then
If I don't agree with what they did,
yes,
well, then we can, we talk about that. That's what we do. Yeah, we don't just pass it through, you know, they said yesterday, I'm up to 27 meetings now. And we talk about all of them.
So I'll just start with there, as kind of an end user of that process.
Yeah.
Is there's a number of moments where the pile gets cut for any submission, whether it's a general fund submission with a regular like expense increase request or a capital project where they don't make it to the committee if internally it's not a priority, right? We have to identify things like, is it accomplishing adopted plan goals? Is it part of an existing initiative? Is it a regulatory requirement?
Right.
And if you don't make it through that initial hurdle, then it doesn't make it to the committee. And then from there, the committees review those and some through capital has a pretty clear like rubric that they use where it scores, and some make it through pretty easily with some description, and then the ones that are on the margins or the ones that aren't there are presented an opportunity to explain why they're needed and why they're important, and then discussed and ultimately decided on. But there's a number of steps where they are decided whether they are a priority of the town.
Right.
That's a very oversimplification.
And then also some things come in, I'm not saying.
That's what it is.
There's some changes that happen as you go.
Right, and sometimes there are also opportunities, right, even kind of the first internal ones where you have a discussion about why, if it's not a established directive, why it's still important, because it may be leading to a bigger project as part of a directive, or it may be something that's
Right.
not in there that's a
Well-
new state requirement that's causing problems, and you
PFAS.
need to address it. Yeah,
Yeah,
is
Exactly.
things that are emerging, so it's a fairly interactive process, but
Yeah, I think it's pretty good for what we have, but I think that it is a big part of being a town councilor. And I guess, just for me personally, just as a voter, if we move to town council, I want them to be responsible. And that I want to hold them accountable, because I think what this process could possibly do is get people to run on issues and to talk about their record. And that's not what the form of government we have now. I mean, that's not how that works. But this could lead to that. And so you would be asking them, why did you support RL and Home? Or why did you support or not support RL and Home? You know, I think this form of government is going more in line with that direction. So I don't want to get these committees to like bog it down, and then they can say, oh, well, that was in that committee.
So it almost sounds like. So I had asked this before and the answer was yes, but it sounds like there are projects that don't make it to your committee. As either FinCom or capital. So there is an area where there are many projects that don't make it through to that committee. Where before I said, do you even see the ones that aren't recommended? And I thought the response was yes. So it sounds like with the new form of government, the town manager is still doing that same process. They would
Correct.
still potentially have an additional committee to essentially make those recommendations and push them forward. But it almost just looks like there's just more information out there public wise than maybe what could be now. Because I don't think people see, like, if Jeff put 5 projects forward, but the towns,
see that.
they flipped door and they said, well, we're only gonna push maybe these 2, we'll hold
Oh,
off
I
on
don't-
these for out years. You're only reviewing the 2, you're not looking at all of them. Unless
All
other people say, no, this is important. But I think the way Bo's saying it is that would all kind of, the same function that sort of the ranking and everything that happens now would still be there.
Right.
But the committee sort of sees all of it. And then the council has more, I guess, accountability versus saying, yes, we make the recommendation, FinCom recommends it, and now it goes to town meeting. Who many of the people who are voting on it don't have all those 27 meetings of discussion
Yeah,
on the article.
but I mean, do you think that they need to know every single request that Jeff made to Libby, and the one?
As the town council, yes, I do.
Oh, yeah, definitely, but I'm saying now, like, does Capcom really need to know? if
No,
Jeff asked
but
for something and
that's
Libby was
what we're
like, "Hey,
talking
can you come
about.
till next year?" I mean, that's kind of how.
No, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that's what we're talking about. That's where the transition is. That's where,
That's
so if
right.
this is what they do right now. The purpose and some of the discussion about why to transition to town council is to maybe make that process more efficient and have that more information out there. So I don't think we're really talking about completely altering the system. It's just where it falls right now is a little different.
Oh, I agree. I think it will be different. I think it will be out more in the open.
I think it's a
I mean, our.
It's a
committee's in the
complete
open,
change in like accountability cycle, right?
Yeah.
At least in how I see it, where those decisions happen, but if the council is working with the town manager, they can certainly say, well, now that we've seen everything that we're putting forward or approval, we want to sit down and see what didn't make it into the budget proposals, like what's going on in the background to see it, and they can hold the town manager and department heads accountable for what else has happened, where it's very difficult now, in my opinion, for town meeting to do that
Right.
as the legislative body.
And if I may follow up, I would say based on some of the comments that we heard from Libby at the one meeting. Was to put that all on her position right now, or the town manager position right now is just a lot.
Yeah.
So she would probably still need some form of a capital or a finance or something to help with that process. So like you're saying, there's a lot of delegation because your plate is just too full. You don't want to put that on one person anyways. You would want a committee to help you vet that and go through that. So I just look at it as kind of shifting where those cuts and where those discussions are having, but I would be quite surprised if anybody recommended not having a capital or finance committee in some manner in this process. They need something
There
there.
are too many requests not to
Yeah.
have a
You,
subcommittee,
you can't, and,
but it could just be a subcommittee of the town council.
right, exactly,
Yeah.
rather than where it is now.
And they have the ability, all right, remember,
Yeah, I guess the only, okay, that's fine. The only thing I would say is it just affects the pay. I mean, because if you're delegating a large amount of work out, then the pay can come down, and that's probably why it is like that, to be honest. Like, if it's,
What do you mean, why it's lower?
yeah, why it's lower, because you're, a lot of these things have been delegated away, and that's fine, but, it's probably.
Well, we already have 2 assistant town managers and the finance director who's almost an assistant town manager and function. So it's not all one person having to do it. There is a hierarchy that.
and not to like self-represent or like toot our horns, but requests that go in to even the town manager or capital, right? Like departments are putting those together, and it's not like get out the finger paints and crayons and throw
No,
something together at the
definitely.
last minute, right? Like
Sorry,
they're,
Jeff, I
no, I'm not saying that way, but like,
that.
but even to like get through that stage, there's a lot of
Yeah.
that goes on, right? Those
Yeah.
projects that are going in are thought out and developed and put together, and I think that's why you try to hire people into those positions where you want the best professional option to say, they're gonna put it together to hopefully make the burden on the town managers and the finance director and that team easier because they're getting good polished proposals from a staff of professionals, and
Right.
that trickles down to where department heads lean on their specialists to say, hey, we got to do this project. You're our expert in this. How do we do it? And how do we do it in a cost effective way? Well, at least we should be doing that. I want to like give like trade secrets here, but like that's how it should go. That burden of review is thorough, but the real hard review is getting done before that proposal is even out of that initial stage.
Yeah, well,
And,
you have a lot of, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't.
Oh,
No, so you have a lot of like grants you're looking at from the state or the feds, like you have a lot of like what's out there, what can I actually go for too? I mean. On the flip side of that. Mel could maybe help us here. With how does it get paid for? Because one thing capital doesn't know is where's that money gonna get paid for? Is it gonna be a debt exclusion? Is it gonna be an override? Is it gonna be free cash? Is it gonna be a budget transfer, that kind of thing? And I'm kind of like, that's not our jurisdiction at Capcom. And I'm wondering how that works in the council.
anyone? All right, go ahead, Mel.
Well, usually the council is involved in that directly with the town manager and, you know, trying to understand how the financing will work and if it's necessary to seek an override or capital debt exclusion or what have you. That's where that happens. I assume that's where it happens now. The select board and the finance committee get involved in that. And in this case, it would be the town council directly.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think that's the main distinction because the legislation or the legislature right now holds the purse strings theoretically, and that's town meeting. So instead of that, there's this group of people, and that is kind of like the main distinction between this system and the current system is that you have this small group of people making those, you know, decisions, those critical decisions. I think that's,
But town meeting doesn't decide where that money gets, how it gets.
well, technically they are.
Well,
that's
they,
that's
but they don't decide that it's going on the ballot. They're not deciding that it's a debt exclusion, for example. Right,
Yeah, but-
they don't decide that, and so I was wondering in the inner workings of town council, like, does the finance director just make a recommendation, Mel, to the town council and to the
Town manager will make the recommendation. Town manager's the point.
What I would say, unless the process has dramatically changed
Right.
since I worked for the town, even as a department head. When you're putting forward the request, that conversation's happening at that level. So I would say the finance director and the town administration, plus the department heads. And then even before any recommendation is made, again, maybe things have changed, but. Almost all the department heads would, you all kind of have a full listing of everything that's recommended. And you'll sort of get the directive that says, okay, well, we only have this. And here's the amount of money, so we can't fund it all. So let's have some discussion on which ones are priority and here's where we're ranking. So I think there's so much that happens already that it's not necessarily gonna change, but I like what you're saying, who decides this is a debt exclusion, who decides this is an override? I think that happens at that request stage, and it would still be part of the town admin and the finance committee, or the
they don't do that
finance
till they-
director that talks about that. And then there's the recommendation that goes forward for
Yeah.
select board, but now it'll be town council. I don't necessarily see where that decision is making is changing, because especially if it all falls to the town manager, she's gonna wanna talk to all the department heads and get that, and also understand how much can we actually fund in the 2.5, and how much has to be an override, how much has to go, but so. I don't know, I feel like that starts internally. Like, I don't think
Some
the
of that-
select
some of the
board
big-
makes that decision now.
But big capital projects would be different. And again, the town
Right.
council would be responsible for that. If they put something forward and your taxes are gonna go up a lot and you're not gonna like it, they need to be responsible for that.
Right.
So now it's a little different. How they do.
But what Bo's saying is right now it goes to town meeting, but that language is, like what you're saying, that language is already there.
Yes, but there's a process for how it gets funded and that usually
Right.
comes after they know how much capital they need. I mean, that's just
Yeah, so
a couple
that,
of articles in the warrant. I mean, that isn't anything to do with all the other things that they have to fund.
maybe that's for Mel. I don't see that decision point changing in council with that. Like,
All
I
right,
don't
Joe?
think that changes.
Just to jump in there, I mean, I think this is a really good discussion and debate. I'm just wondering whether it's something that we ought to push to next Wednesday's meeting and leave a big chunk of time for us to kind of chew on these issues. That's number one. Number two, I'm gonna have to drop off, but number three was, Anthony, were you and the folks from the Collins Center, were you gonna be talking at all about the county charter, or is that a future meeting, future topic?
So we we did send that over. It's not, there aren't a ton of changes, but there are some things the committee should discuss. I don't know if we have time in the next 10 minutes to do it.
Right.
But if you don't have it, I can resend it. But we can talk about that at the next meeting.
I'm sure I got it. It's just I don't have it where I'm sort of sitting at this moment.
I think personally, we should probably just carry that to the next meeting,
Yes,
next week.
I agree.
Okay. Well, Jeff, then we can sort of talk off, email or talk offline and come up with an agenda for next Wednesday. Maybe it would be efficient financially to really just have it be the committee and Anthony, let you and your colleagues off the hook, if you will, for next week's meeting. And then we'll put our heads together in terms of where do we want to go from there.
I did one with the last few minutes, Joe. Give Caroline a couple minutes to provide her update from the Civic League session.
Oh, yes.
That's good.
So,
I'm gonna drop off then. And I will catch up with folks later on.
okay, thanks,
Bye,
Joe.
Joe.
Cheers, everybody.
I already gave this to Joe. I noticed my monthly email from the Civic League that they had us on the agenda, or the town governance on the agenda. So I made sure to go, and I emailed ahead of time to inquire whether they would like to officially coordinate with us so that we could be a participant, or Joe or Jeff, you could be a participant. And they said that they had already heard from us, so that would not be needed. So the hour-long meeting addressed their feeling that they've already heard from us, and that what they are saying that they're interested in now is more the representative form of government. They felt that we had been asked by the select board to look at that back quite a long time ago. And their impression, as I gathered listening to them, was that we had jumped over that rather quickly, and that not enough attention was paid to that possibility. So this is what they would like to put their energies towards in their subcommittee on this topic, where they are preparing for a forum on town governance with a special lens onto representative form, is how I understand it, which is going to be held on March 8th. It's open to the public, and they are putting together speakers. They do not yet know who their speakers are going to be. They said that they had some concern about who it was going to be, but I don't know enough about what that's all about. So, but it is not going to be us. And they told us that if they had any further questions for us, they knew where to find us.
But we can go to that meeting.
Oh, yes, it's open to the public.
I mean, for them to exclude us arbitrarily, I think is disingenuous to be kind.
I was surprised. I didn't you know, I'm involved with the Civic League. I was surprised that I didn't personally hear about this, but it is, you know, they made it public and, well, at least, and to their membership, and they will be making this public. Although they will keep it tailored, as I understand it, to representative form of government and also town meeting. So they're particularly interested in the comparison between keeping town meeting and representative as what will best further what they think would be fair governance. They do, I think, I therefore gather that this is not a choice that they
don't think
feel.
town council is an option?
I think that I understood from them that that was not their preference, if I understood it correctly. And that they would rather look at keeping town meeting versus representative. So I didn't have a chance to speak further. I would have clarified that our task is to put together town council. We did not have, we all agreed, and town council clarified for us that it was not an option for us to come up with a representative form of government. And of course, we've been recommended by our consultant that it would not be an apt option for us from their point of view anyway, as I've understood it. And I think that it maybe was not understood by the Nantucket Civic League about all those details, but I'm not sure.
Well, I wonder if they're gonna do their own research so that they can hear from people who might have said that to
We should
them.
invite the
Well,
Collins.
I understood from previous communications from them and some forums that I've sat in on, that they have previously, and I think Hillary Rayport, who's involved with them, I think that she's spoken here to us in the very beginning as a member of the public to indicate that there was specific interest on her part. I think that she's interacting with them about representative town government is what I'm gathering, but I shouldn't speak for them, but that was my impression.
Gotcha.
Well, that's a quick question. Is the opinion that representative is the one, is that the position of the Civic League, or is that the position of that small subset of the Civic League that's looking?
The two or three people in there.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but what I gather from listening, they invited me to stay for the rest of the meeting. So I listened and I gathered that they had already put us to the side as a charter change because town council was not in the way they see it or the subset sees it as good as the representative form. And that it needs to be closely compared to open town meeting because they're not yet sure which is best. So they want to just focus on that. And I don't know, it definitely seemed that the Nantucket Civic League was going to be spending its energy looking at that because this was the public forum they were putting together and they have a subcommittee to look at that.
I have a question. Does the Civic League encompass those 22 area associations by definition, or is this just the bullet group controlled?
I don't know how I don't know the method by which they represent the area groups that are on their header. And I don't know if it is an accurate reflection of
Well,
those.
for example, you know, we met with the Pulpus Association, we met with Tom Nevers, we met with Sconset. Aren't they part of the Civic League? Does the league know that these
No,
other groups are?
Well, I can speak for the Brant Point Association.
Yeah, you're
Since I'm on the board of that one. And it would only be if the members of our association had received that email. And if they had looked at it and no one else attended from my group except for me, so.
But you got a notice that it was on the agenda?
Well, I get the monthly notices from the Civic League.
Well,
So I don't know how to answer that.
So
Sure.
maybe I have I feel like I'm taking a page from Bo's book here. Sorry.
go get them. Come on.
So we have from the Collins Center and we have the comparative stuff. And my understanding from the committee is one of the main reasons why we thought that was not in the best interest of the town of Nantucket was because of that form of government. I guess you could do all at large, but maybe the main point of the representative, and I could be totally wrong, is you sort of have designated areas of the island. And we heard from Collins about breaking that up with a minimum amount of owners in that area and how that might be carved differently than what people's perception is. And we have had some discussion. But recently, we even learned that our own charter sort of removed us from precincts. So it's sort of like going to representative is rescinding that special act and revisiting all of that. So I guess maybe this is where we can inquire from the town clerk or somebody, where did that original special act to get rid of precincts come from?
Yeah, and
Because that
that
might
is
help us support, and that was approved.
Yeah.
So I feel like our own internal conversation on this committee kind of piggybacked on that, even though we didn't even realize at the time that there was such a special act. So the Civic League sort of seems to go back to carving out and creating those precincts that we moved away from. So
also
I would
could
be
I
interested to
add-
see where that discussion evolves. And I don't know if it's even within our realm or ability, if there's even a way right now to actually do a draft idea of where these precincts might lie, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that encompasses. And I hear from other people that say, well, Sconset will have a representative and Tom Nevers will have a representative, or Pocomo and this one and that one. And I don't think that's exactly the way it will pan out. And I'm wondering if that, like you said, there's all these other organizations in there. I'm wondering if that type of exercise is even within our realm of ability, probably not. But that might help them in
Yes.
terms of understanding the review and why they might be for representative, which is sort of completely against why we are, which is doing that is not as clear cut as, okay, Mattakit, Tom Nevers, Sconset.
Yes, and if I may, if we could take the Nantucket Civic League as a type of bellwether. Public feedback, right? A subgroup of it. It says to us that since we did go through all that and we have the knowledge, we've organized it, Collins has helped us with it. And we've already been through this. Maybe that is a point that we really need to do a better job with our PR and our public education efforts to get it out there in a way that's more metabolizable. So that the Civic League can go, oh, look, oh, okay, this is why. Oh, all right. Because I think maybe they just missed that. I don't know.
And I echo Curtis. I think not including us in a conversation and saying, thank you, we've heard from you, but we're gonna do this is a little too dismissive. They don't have to agree with us. I'm not saying that at all. They can certainly disagree, but I think us not being a part of the process by doing the vetting, having the Collins Center and their expertise behind us would be a shame for them to not
It was my
at least
feeling.
have us part of the
Yes,
conversation.
it did not feel collaborative and I was disappointed in that.
Right, we can real quick and then we gotta wrap up.
So before we spoke about an organizational chart, like what town council is and what the open town meeting is, did that ever happen? I think that comes from the town center. Because I get a lot of questions too about like it's a representative town council, and I'm like, no, it's not, and they're like, yes, it is, and there's somebody from Mattakit, so.
The comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a chart.
Government available in that.
Right, but I don't know, like, is there an organizational chart so that we could? Like,
Yeah, I feel like they sent it. I'll take a look and we'll try to get it posted if it's.
right,
if
and
it's
then one
not.
more quick question. Donna had said like the non-residents can be in committees. Is that, like, you don't have to be a tax-paying resident, a registered voter here to come to? Is that right?
Here
That-
now, you don't have,
Yeah, that's-
they can take anybody.
Yeah. That currently exists.
But not elected, just appointed, or do you have to be? Like, so if you were.
To be elected, you have to be a registered voter.
Okay, but to be appointed, you don't have.
But to be appointed, you don't, yeah. And there are many of us who would love to serve Nantucket.
Absolutely.
All right, so don't forget, we have a meeting next week as well, since we missed last week. Some people will be away, some people won't be. But with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
So moved. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you,
We're adjourned.
Anthony.
Thanks, everybody.
Hello.
Everyone.
And so.
I really want Mel to keep explaining some of